Tour here. So this is the East Front Gardens at Hampton Court. My name is Andy, your driver is Stafford, and most importantly I'll introduce you to our horses. So you have Royale on the left, you have Massey on the right. They are Englishshire horses. So the Englishshire was originally bred as a war horse during the time of Henry VIII. So they would have carried knights in armour into battle. And because of the size and the strength, they later became the workhorses of England. So you would have seen them ploughing the fields, pulling the canal barges, pulling the big buses full of people in the central cities. And so they were very important historically in England. And then in the 60s, after the war, they didn't really have a job to do. The motor car came in and they became very rare as a breed, to the point where they neared extinction. They recognised this in time, they began to conserve them, and one of the ways they found to conserve them is to provide them work to do, to find them sustainable jobs. So that's really what we do here. We've got 7 shires, 3 of which we work here, Hampton Court, and then 4 we work at Richmond Park doing agricultural and conservation work. So Royale is 17, Massey is 9 years old.
Oh, he's still young, isn't he?
Yeah, he's still young. Yeah. And they both weigh about 1.25 tons each. So they're heavy horses. So the feature which really dominates the gardens, which you'll notice, are the shaped trees. So these are yew trees. There's 2 forms of yew. We have the mushroom yew, which we're just passing here now on our left in a moment. And most of those are well over 300 years old. And they were planted when the formal gardens were first laid here by William and Mary. And then at the back, with the yews which grow down to the ground, they're called pepperpot yews. And most of those are about 100 years old.
1 century.
Yeah. They were originally planted as very small ornamental trees, and then later during the time of Capability Brown they were allowed to grow a lot larger and more natural, and then they were reshaped in recent times.
We don't have this before.
Sorry?
When did this started?
The tour?
Yeah.
About 5 years ago.
Only 5 years ago?
Yeah.
Because we've been coming here. We've been here so many times, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because when we have visitors from abroad, like she came from Saudi, we take them here.
Yeah.
And most of the time we are here.
Yeah.
From America, from
Yeah.
So we get,
I understand that.
and now we are surprised that you have this right now.
Oh, really? Well, maybe you've missed this before.
It's good, though. It's very good.
We work April to October.
Really?
So yeah, we have the winters off, but the summers we work. Yeah. So the gardens over the wall behind us, they're the privy or the private gardens of William and Mary. You get a really beautiful perspective of the palace from here. So they've been restored to look like they would have at the time in a French formal style, and they were restored in 1995. And if you can see over the trees towards the river, you notice the gilded ironwork screens, which are called Tijou screens. And they were made by a famous French blacksmith called Jean Tijou. The idea behind the design was to create privacy within the gardens from the river, which was a busy thoroughfare of its day. Everyone travelled into and out of London along the river predominantly. And at the time of Henry VIII, there was actually a main entrance to the palace here, where these trees are now. There was a large wooden building called the Water Gallery, and that was where Henry would have boarded his royal barge and gone sailing on the Thames wherever he needed to get to.
So what's this now here?
They're just actually restoring the ironwork.
Oh, going into a drop. That's quite fast, isn't it? I'm quite surprised.
Yeah, get some speed up when they want to.
Cool.
So we trot them up the hill just to get a bit of momentum going behind us. Yeah. So we trotted into Lime Avenue, which is lined by lime or linden trees, and the avenue travels round the gardens and then out into Home Park to our right. So Home Park was traditionally the hunting grounds for the palace. It was first enclosed by Cardinal Wolsey. He built a brick wall all the way around, so it's about 600 acres out there. And at that time they would have stocked it with wild boar and deer and with rabbit and hare out there. And also at that time there was no formal gardens or canal, so Henry would have actually rode straight out from the palace and into his hunting grounds and caught whatever they could catch and bring it back to the palace table to eat. There's no wild boar anymore out there, but there's descendants of the original deer. They still live out there. So there's about 300 fallow deer, and they can trace the lineage of the herd right back to the first deer that were put there. So it's a very old special herd. And it's well worth a look if you've got some time to have a walk. It's a beautiful, peaceful place out there. So
Can you get out there, can you?
yeah, you can. It's open to the public.
Oh, right.
You have to go out of the palace.
Oh, out of the palace.
About 5 minutes walk along a path, and then you
But
get
it's
there.
still part of the palace.
Yeah, it's still part
How
of it.
many
yeah.
acres is the land?
So 600 out there, and there's about 60 acres of gardens within the palace boundary. So yeah, it's quite a substantial place. So if you cast your eyes back to the palace now, you get a really good appreciation of the two eras, the two halves of the palace. So the part on the left of the darker brick and the taller chimneys, that's the original Tudor part. So about 500 years ago, it was first built by Cardinal Wolsey as a cardinal's palace. The designs were brought from Rome to build the perfect cardinal's palace, and so he did in the eyes of Henry VIII. So much so that Henry took it over a few years later, and he extended it to about 3 times the size that it had been originally built. It became quite a sprawling palace complex. There was a large tower in the Privy Gardens where the ladies would have watched the hunting in the parkland. He extended the kitchens and the wine cellars and built a great hall in order to accommodate his banquets. The tilt yard with its 5 towers went in for the jousting, and there was the tennis court and the maze. So it was a very, very different place at that time. And then 150 years later, when William and Mary came to the throne, they loved the location, but they really didn't like the palace. It wasn't the fashion of the time. The Baroque style was in, and they wanted a new palace that would outdo Versailles in France. And so they set to it. They commissioned Christopher Wren, who designed and began to build what you see on the right, the Baroque palace. The original plan was to completely remove all of the Tudor palace, so there would have been no Tudor palace, and they would have had a much, much bigger Baroque palace. What happened was they had very lavish tastes. They overspent during the build, they changed their mind during the build, and they actually ran out of money. Once they'd run out of money, they went to Parliament to ask for more. They were refused, and so they had to make the decision to join what they built of a Baroque palace to what was left of a Tudor palace.
That's people tax. That's tax. People's tax, is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, very much
They
so.
went to the parliament for us, extra money. That's our tax. Well, not ours now, because it was centuries ago.
So once they'd built the palace, they began to formalise the gardens, which we're travelling through now. At that time, they put 13 fountains into this area. But if you notice, the Thames was actually lower in water level than the gardens, so they couldn't bring the water up and into the gardens to feed the fountains. So they had to divert the river about 14 miles away, downstream into the gardens in order to feed the fountains. It still didn't work, the water pressure still wasn't enough, and so they had to add a hand pump onto each fountain. This became a very theatrical affair, and so when Queen Anne came to the throne, she removed all but the central fountain, which you see to our right. And you'll notice with the central fountain and the avenue that we're travelling down now at the moment, that they're laid out in what they call a goosefoot style. So it's 3 avenues which radiate out from the entrance of the palace and into Home Park. And you notice the central one is actually followed. Sorry? Yeah, you do. 350 per person to ride on here. We stop just up here, you'll see us stop in a moment, yeah? So you'll notice that the 3 avenues laid out in the goosefoot style, and the central one, which cuts through the fountain, then extends out and back into what they call the Long Water. A long lake, about a mile or so long, and it's finished at the far end with big plumed fountains. The trees provide perspective, designed to be a beautiful view from the Queen's bedroom, which which is the window with the half-drawn blind. So if you're inside the palace and you peer through that window, you can appreciate what you may have seen as you won't. So that's the peaceful gardens. There we go. Just the end of our journey. I hope you enjoyed that.
Thank you, it was lovely. Very good, very thorough conversation. Commentary, I mean. Oh, good. It's a beautiful ride.